Welcome back to MMAOddsBreaker. Today we have the party, Lance Palmer, online, getting ready to fight Chris Horodecki, coming up here in World Series of Fighting 21. It's a featherweight championship, defending his belt. Wasn't there supposed to be somebody else, like you were the co-main event originally, and then it got switched up to the main event? Wasn't there somebody else supposed to be in front of you, like Comain and Ford or something?
I don't know. I think they changed at first they had the heavyweight bout on there as the main event, and then they just changed it over for us to be the main event because I guess that's where Chris is from, or he's from near there or something.
Chris spends a lot of his fights there in Edmonton, but he's actually from Ontario, the other side of the country. But
Okay.
to me, it was weird too, because I saw that same thing where it was like Ford and Okami, and I think Ford got hurt, and then they moved the heavyweights up to the main event. But you guys with the title fight, and they switched it around. It was like really confusing for a second. And I always thought that you guys should have been the main event. If it's a title fight, by weight you should be up there first. Does that really bother you when you get switched around like that? First your co-main event, then your main event, then your swing bout. Like, does that ever bother you?
It doesn't really bother me at first. I thought it was weird because when I saw the card in the beginning before they announced our fight, they had Ford and Okami as the main event, and I was like, that doesn't even make sense. If there's a title fight, the title fight should be the main event, or at least it didn't make sense at all to me. But I guess they got it squared around, and everything's how it should be. But that's how every other card does it. The title fight's the main fight or the co-main fight with another title fight, and usually it goes by weight class. So usually the heavier weights are the main event, and then the lighter weights are the co-main. But I guess it just depends. But yeah, at first it was weird because I was like, well, they didn't even have me announced on the card as the co-main or main for a title fight at first, and then it got switched around. So yeah, that was strange. I don't know why they did that, but everything is. It doesn't matter either way. I'm going in the cage, but usually that's how they do that.
Yeah, I mean, just does it make a difference to sponsors and stuff though too? That where you're the difference of being a co-main event and main event, is there a difference in sponsorship money possibly for that kind of thing?
I think it could be.
Excuse me.
I think that's a good way you could promote yourself also. Telling a sponsor that you're the main event on NBC Sports Network compared to being a co-main or not even either of those two. I think it could make a difference, and I think in the future, after this thing in July happens with the UFC, with the sponsorship, with Reebok, I think that'll definitely make a big difference for myself and other people outside the UFC.
Have you started finding ways to make your sponsorships financially viable even outside the cage or ring? Because that seems like what a lot of guys are doing over at the UFC now, is because they have the Reebok deal, and it's tiered off of how many fights they have in the UFC, and that's just what the number is. And for them to make money, like a guy like Josh Berkman, who just fought this last weekend, he makes a lot of his money outside anyway, just because of how he set himself up. Do you have sponsors like that where you make a lot of money outside of the cage? It's not necessarily your in-ring sponsors, but you have sponsorships to help you outside?
I haven't started making a lot outside. I have a good deal with Torque right now for their athletic clothing, and I'm looking to do a lot of other things outside the cage. But right now it's everybody wants to say they sponsor a UFC fighter. It's not a professional fighter. It's a UFC fighter is like the main goal for a lot of these sponsors. And I know why. It's, look at me, I sponsor a UFC fighter instead of, sponsoring a fighter. So I see where they come from with that. But, a lot of these other organizations, World Series of Fighting, Bellator, everybody's, all these guys are great fighters, including myself. So I think it makes a lot of difference.
How do you rank yourself in comparison to the rest of the guys? Like you see everybody else around, you see a bunch of different people, competing in these different organizations. Like, how do you see yourself ranked up against these other guys, outside of World Series of Fighting?
Outside of the organization, how do I compare myself?
Yeah.
I mean, I compare myself, and I consider myself a top 10 fighter. I think if I was to, people say the UFC is the top of the crop, but I consider if I fought against any of those top 10 guys, I consider myself as one of those guys. And in the world of MMA at featherweight, whether it's Bellator, World Series, or the UFC, I consider myself top of the crop. So right now I got to compete against the other guys that they have for me in World Series of Fighting, and right now my competition is against Chris Horodecki, and I don't look past that, and I don't look past my next fight. So, you know, I always consider myself the best. I train with Chad Mendez, who's one of the top guys in the world, and you know, arguably, you know, one of the best guys in the world. So,
Right.
his only losses are to Jose Aldo, who's been the 145-pound king, and you know, that's who I kind of, you know, look up to and train with every day. So to say that I'm not top 10 in the world is it would be an understatement for myself, I think.
Well, you look at Chris, and you talk about the guy that's right in front of you, Chris Horodecki. He's the next guy in line. He's the guy you got to face right now. 21-5-1 is his record. You're only 9-1. Now, I say only 9-1, not because you have that one loss, but because you've only got 10 fights compared to his 21 fights or his 27 fights. That's a lot of work. That, you know, from an experience level, it's completely different. When we would wrestle against guys with that much more experience, it doesn't bother us because we had so many competitions so often. It'd be, you know, you'd have a dual meet Tuesday, dual meet Thursday, and then you have a tournament on Saturday. So you've got a lot of matches in throughout the year. With fighting, you only have like 4 chances, you know, per year to really showcase how good you are. Does a man with experience like that, with Chris, has that much experience? Does that mindset go into the game plan of prepping for this fight? That, hey, he's got a lot of experience, so there's a couple things I got to work on to keep that experience from coming into effect?
I don't think that really plays into it too much because my experience started when I was 5 years old. You know, I started taking karate when I was 5 years old. I started wrestling at a high level when I was 5 years old. I think if you go by experience, that's experience for me.
Mm-hmm.
I think I hold that experience over his head. As far as being in the cage goes, yeah, that's experience, but I've had that mental toughness and discipline and hard training and pushing myself to the limit since I was 5. So if you take experience, I have the experience.
Do you even know how many wrestling matches you had in your career?
Honestly, I think I've had, you know, over 10,000 matches. When I started wrestling when I was 9 years old, my dad took my brother and I to 2 tournaments a weekend, sometimes one in Pennsylvania, one in West Virginia, or one in Ohio, one in West Virginia. So I've been wrestling, you know, over 100 matches a year since I was 9 years old, all the way up until high school when I had, you know, 30 to 40 matches a year. So it could, you know, maybe I didn't wrestle that many matches total, but it's somewhere up there in the thousands. And, you know, every weekend I was getting experience, and with karate, I was doing, you know, we had light sparring rounds in karate when I was 5 years old. So, you know, I consider all that stuff experience, and freestyle tournaments and matches in the summer and all that stuff for me is experience that, you know, nobody really can compare to, honestly, unless it's another wrestler who's wrestled that long.
You know, that's why so many wrestlers can come in and be 5-0 and all of a sudden they're in title shots. It's because they've had so much experience doing it. And the style of the sport just dictates that, hey, you're going to get, even on a light year, you're going to get 32, 42 matches on a light year. You know, if you're out there really hustling, really pushing, trying to get a lot of time in, you'll get over 100 matches without a problem. And that's every time that's experience. Every time that's that's that rush. The energy of having to warm up, the energy of having to cool down, the energy of you get used to that whole mindset. So I agree with you. You know, that energy, you had that held over Chris's head. Yes, he's had more time in the cage or ring from a mixed martial arts standpoint, but you had way more time to prepare. Do you see this fight actually going the distance? Do you see yourself being able to finish Chris before it gets to the end?
I train to go the distance every fight, like my last one with Rick Glenn. I trained to go 25 minutes hard and be in a brawl. And Rick Glenn had the experience over me, too, if we look at it from an MMA standpoint. He was, I don't remember his record, 15 and something or 15 and 2 or whatever before we fought. But I look at it as, you know, I'm going in there and I consider myself the best in the cage when I step in there on, you know, whatever the date is of that fight. So I'm ready for it to go 25, but I go out there to get the finish and I go out there to get the win early. So, you know, if it goes 1 round, 2 rounds, 3 rounds, 4 rounds, or even 5 rounds, I train for it to go that, you know. But whatever happens in there. I just go in there and try and get the finish.
Now, I know you said you train with Chad Mendez every day. That's the guy you're kind of looking towards. But his style is totally different than Chris Horodecki's. It's a totally different style. Did you work with anybody specifically in the Team Alpha Male that mimics Chris Horodecki's style?
Really, I just train with all orthodox guys, you know, right-handed guys who threw kicks and threw combos and I know you can't look past anybody, and you have to just, there's nobody that I brought in or had in the gym
Right.
just for his style, but Faber's been in the gym, and he was training for his fight, and Faber was on the same card as Horodecki a few times in WEC and a couple different things. So, I know Horodecki's fighting style, and I've watched a bunch of his fights, but all in all, when I go in there, nobody's going to mimic him, like him, no matter what you do. I just have to go out there and impose my offense and impose my will. And it's my fight. I don't want to bring in guys and train for Chris Horodecki. Chris Horodecki has to train for me.
That's Lance Palmer getting ready to fight Chris Horodecki in World Series of Fighting coming up on June 5th. Lance, thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate it. I know right in the middle of your day trying to get your lunch going on, so I appreciate taking a quick few minutes to talk to us. We'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon, man. Keep that beard growing.
I'm going to try. I got to keep pulling it out. Just keep pulling it down.
Heck yeah, dude.
Thanks, man.
Later, man.